And sir. And I just want to thank the whole team at the Critical Conversations support team, and Dini in particular for the support for the series. Thank you all for coming regularly, and we've had a great time becoming able to be part of this community and part of your lives. So thank you.
Good evening, rabbis. It's a pleasure to be sitting here with two such distinguished rabbis. So, I think the best place to start our conversation is, since the topic for tonight's discussion is faith after October 7th, why don't we begin by defining what faith means from a Jewish perspective? As a rabbi, I've met many Jews who said, Rabbi, I'm a thinker, I'm an intellectual, I work on logic and reason, faith just doesn't work for me. Can you be a faithful person and an intellectual thinker, rational, logical person? Can they coexist? So if you could elaborate on what faith and the definition of faith is, Judaism's perspective.
Good evening. Firstly, thank you for having me, and I'm honored to be sharing the panel at this Shabbat celebration. Being as one who deals with many people from all backgrounds, and primarily skeptics and cynics, so this question I hear all the time. Of course, faith is for the weak, faith is a crutch, faith is escapism, nothing to do with reality. It all goes back down to the battle between science and religion, where science has replaced the need for faith. And this is pretty much common Western thinking for most people. So faith remains this enigmatic. At the same time, you find quite intelligent people who are deeply faithful. So let me, going into all the stereotypes, let's cut through the Jewish definition of faith may surprise you. Faith is not the absence of reason. Faith is not for the desperate when all else fails. Faith is actually an even more powerful tool than the rational mind. And I would submit that most decisions that people make in life are not based on logic. They may not call it faith, they may call it emotions, intuition, instinct, love, whatever you want to call it, but it's definitely not pure. We're not computers. The biggest decisions in life are going to be based on something that's far less tangible. The Jewish people from the beginning of time recognized this truth from Abraham, that the mind can only lead you that far. It's a machine. It's a great machine, a sophisticated machine, but can only lead you that far. It leads you to a door, and the only way through that door is with something that is super rational, not irrational, and not beneath the rational, beyond the rational. And that's a domain for those that are the most intelligent people, are the ones that have the deepest faith, because the wiser you are, the broader the horizon you see. You see how much more there is to know. And I'll add just one more point, which I'm sure we'll talk about more, is that faith is actually, I would say, I've even thinking about the title of the new book, Weaponizing Faith. It's our single most powerful weapon, more than our minds and more than our wits. So we need our minds, but then we need something that has that super rational, unequivocal, unwavering conviction, which is what gave us the power to be here today, thousands of years, like no other nation.
So before I speak to the very important question, I just want to emphasize how joyful I am to be here. I want to express my profound gratitude to Terry and Paul for the blessing of their friendship. I want to say how delightful it is to see so many old friends here in Palm Beach, and to specifically stress how happy I was to see Roger and Susan Hertog and to spend time with them here this evening. In analyzing what faith is, especially after October 7th, we should take note of the fact that in a profound way, at least in Israel, faith has increased rather than decreased following those terrible events. It was just a recent Jerusalem Post article which told us that, quote, an absolute majority of respondents, 75%, said that since October 7th, they feel a greater connection. They feel a greater connection to the state of Israel and the diverse Israeli society, and it adds, Israelis have become closer to God and Judaism in the past 4 months. 33% of Israelis have reported a strengthened faith in God since the October 7th massacre by Hamas. So we have these two things going hand in hand. A strengthening of faith and a strengthening of a connection to the Jewish people, which seems to indicate that there is a bond between the two. What does that mean, and what does that tell us about faith? And why has faith increased rather than decreased in Israel following October 7th? So I'm just making an attempt at the answer, but I would attempt to answer in the following way. There's a very dear friend of mine, and dear to some here in the audience, Dan Senor, who wrote, of course, a very well-known book called Startup Nation about Israel. And in the months preceding October 7th, he, along with his brother-in-law, Saul Singer, were working on a new book called The Genius of Israel. The book was analyzing why Israelis rank so high on the happiness quotient if they face such existential crises all the time. By the way, post-October 7th, they did another survey, happiness survey, and among young people, Israel ranked number 2 in happiness in the world. Number 1, Lithuania. So, as a Litvak, a Lithuanian Jew, I'm like the happiest person in the world, which is what Litvaks are known for sure. And that's our thing, is the joy and happiness of life. But the answer he proposes in the book is that Israelis deep down understand that they are part of something much larger than themselves, something remarkable, something really utterly unlike most stories on earth. The problem for my friend Dan is that as this book was about to be published, Israeli society was tearing itself to pieces. The publisher was saying maybe we shouldn't publish this book. First, because it was slated to be published on the same date as Barbara Streisand's memoir was going to be published. And Dan has to convince the publisher that this is a slightly different audience for this book. And then second, you saw Israelis and he's drilling in each other's throats. But Dan said, no, we're making an argument book that deep down, really, Israelis do sense this. They still sense this beneath the surface. And then right before the book was supposed to come out, on Yom Kippur, we saw scenes in the streets of Tel Aviv where Jews were fighting over just having a traditional Yom Kippur service, providing it in the streets of Tel Aviv to just denizens of the city who wanted a traditional moment of faith. And then, of course, less than 2 weeks later, everything changed. And a week after that, you'll recall, I think it was maybe October 13th, 14th, there was a Shin Bet operation where one hostage was saved. You remember that? And there was a scene that unfolded on Israeli TV where the news broke during the broadcast, where it was announced that this hostage was saved. And the anchor was a secular Israeli who was sitting next to a contributor who was wearing a kippah. And he turned live to the contributor and he said, can I borrow your kippah for a second? And live on screen he takes the kippah, puts it on his head and says a blessing. Blessed are you, O Lord, Matir Asurim, who frees the captives. And on Twitter, a tech guy commented, and he wrote, 1 month ago I could not imagine a scene like this. And my friend Dan immediately retweeted it and wrote, it was always beneath the surface. Pre-October 7th, we were all just distracted by other things. So what does this mean? Why has the faith increased? The answer, I think, is that in a striking way, This terrible event reminded Israelis and Jews about Jewish history and about the fact that we have faced so many enemies in the past. And yet we are not only still here, we are thriving and we have impacted the world beyond imagining and beyond our numbers. In a counterintuitive way, it reminded the Jewish people that our story is anything but a normal story. Which again leads people to ponder, why is that so? And how do we explain it? The best I can do, and I'll close with this, is a quote that I often cite. And this is from an old article by the writer Yossi Klein about the most famous photograph in Israeli history, which is the three soldiers at the wall. And he talks about growing up with his father, who was a Holocaust survivor, who still continued to go to synagogue but never spoke about faith. Ever. Because of his experiences. And then he writes, toward the end of June 1967, my father and I flew to Israel. Standing at the wall, my father suddenly found his lack of faith inadequate. There is something about this little people that makes no sense, he said to me. Who can understand this history? And Halevi wrote the story, actually, a very terrible time for Israel. This was Olmert's war in Lebanon, which in a certain sense was the first, you could say, the first war that Israel had really lost. And so he wrote about the depression that people were feeling in Israel at the time when he wrote, or as he puts it, the disappointments that have marked much of Israeli life in the past 25 years have culminated in this year of political shame and military defeat. And then he adds that often now, having made Aliyah inspired by that moment with his father at the wall, he sometimes forgets that he's anywhere special, living in Jerusalem. And then he writes, suddenly, quote, he says, I remember where I am. I feel myself then like one of those barefoot and wide-eyed Ethiopian immigrants, silently stepping off the plane at Ben Gurion Airport in Zion. I recall to my father's wonder at the wall, whose fragile and improbable endurance he saw as a metaphor for the Jewish people. Like him, and this is the critical point, like him, I ask myself what it is about this strange little people that continually finds itself at the center of international attention, repeatedly on the front lines against totalitarian forces of evil. Nazism, Soviet communism, now jihadism, all of which mark the Jews as the primary obstacle to achieving world domination. At those moments, he writes, I feel gratitude for having found my place in this story. In a strange and counterintuitive way, that is what has occurred because the Jewish people suddenly find itself again against a totalitarian force of evil. But that has led them to ponder even more so the miraculous story of the Jewish people. And to find what my friend Dan was always said was always beneath the surface. To find once again their place in the story, which of course leads them to the source of this story. And that I think is the beginning of faith.
Thank you, Rabbi. We have with us tonight Leah Poland, the grandmother of Hirsch Goldberg Poland, who's been in captivity for 172 days. Where is she? Okay, if you don't mind standing up, I just want to acknowledge you. All of our hearts are joined in prayer with you, that you should be reunited with your beloved grandson speedily. But the difficult question I think that many of us have on our mind is, we say in our Shemona Esrei 3 times a day, in the opening prayer, Melech Ozer Moshiach. God is a king who helps, saves, and protects. We refer to God throughout our prayers as Av HaRachaman, a merciful, compassionate Father in heaven. Knowing the atrocities that occurred on October 7th, and we don't have to speak the horrible things that occurred, to innocent men, women, and children, little children burned alive. It was a Holocaust. How can we say those words with sincerity, that God is a king who helps, saves, and protects, and that he's merciful and compassionate, Where was God on October 7th? And what role did God have in the events and the tragedies of October 7th? Rabbi Jacobson first.
Without going into any elaborate philosophical, I think the most important thing to keep in mind, and maybe this is the ultimate secret of faith, is that we don't have answers to the most fundamental questions of life. And that's not a statement of surrender or weakness. It's actually the most honest and brutal truth. And that's why you'll find in all our literature, whether it's the Bible, the written Torah, the oral Torah, the Midrashim, the stories, and we know how much, we don't even know how much, but we know in every generation we've suffered. Nowhere has anyone ever tried to answer the question, why did this happen? Where is this good God that promised grace, blessings, gifts? The only answer you find is actually the exact opposite. When Aaron's two sons tragically died in the Holy of Holies, it says, Vayidem Aaron, Aaron fell silent. When the Roman emperor perpetrated his atrocities, the October 7th of that time, that we repeat every Yom Kippur, Eila Eskere, we say, these are the ones that are remembered, the 10 martyrs, Asari Arugei Malchus, and in graphic detail, it describes how they were brutally murdered, which I will not repeat. So the angels and Moses himself come to God and say, Zu Torah, Zu Schara, this is Torah and this is its reward. And what does God answer? Oh, anyone has an answer, God has an answer. And they had access. God responds, Shake, be silent, Kach the Machshav, that's what arose in my thought. Again and again, silence, silence, silence. So ostensibly it would sound, okay, you don't have an answer, so you're quiet, you're silent. It's not correct. It's the most powerful answer possible. Like the old Belzer Rebbe, they say, when he was asked after the Holocaust, he said, if God, he was asked about these events, he said, if God wanted to come to me and explain to me why it happened, I wouldn't want to hear it. What are we going to do? Exactly justify why 1.5 million innocent children went up in smoke? The best of us, and what does it matter? Every innocent Jew didn't find an explanation. The explanation would be even more criminal and more painful and more obscene than the crime. Now, in this lies tremendous, tremendous truth. I remember I was, a number of years ago, I was in South Africa, a lecture tour. For some reason, at that period in time, there were quite a few tragedies in the community there. Loyal, God should protect us all. Parents who'd lost children. I mean, it was really hard. And they asked me to give a private session, a private talk, just to those that had recently suffered. Honestly, I was so uncomfortable. What am I going to say? And I was, thank God, I've been blessed. How am I going to stand in front of a mother that lost a child? What am I going to say? I was like, but, you know, like they say, it's hard to speak, but it's maybe harder to be silent. So I shared some of what I've heard, some of what I just said now. And I remember saying that I am here to tell you that I don't have an answer. And I'm not looking for an answer. And the Jewish people's wisdom was they never asked why. They asked, what are we going to do about it? That was our power. When Job the classic sufferer, stands before God, an entire book where he laments and complains and argues with God. Why? The classic question. Why are bad things happening to good people? How can a good God do these things? So there's one verse that to me always resonates, where God says, and paraphrasing, he says to Job, you ask me why these things happen. You ask me why there's death and why there's pain. Were you there when I created heaven and earth that you asked me this question? You asked me why there's death, but did you ask me why there's birth? You asked me why there's pain. Did you ask me why there's joy? You asked me why there's loss. Did you ask me why is there love? We don't ask that question because we assume, take it for granted. It's all bound together. Because if there was no life and there was no beginning, there'd be no end. If there was no birth, there'd be no death. So the real question is, why did you put this whole thing in place in the first place? If we didn't have existence, we wouldn't have pain. Can someone here ready to venture to try to answer that question? And the non-answer is not ignorance. It's the greatest strength. I remember meeting a woman who was one of the first terrorist victims. Remember in Shalim, in Jerusalem, in Ben Yehuda rather, the cafe, the bombing on Friday. I mean, that was a terrible time. So anyway, she's an American woman who came to study in yeshiva in Jerusalem. She had come to a class of mine. And I remember I saw her sitting in the back. I didn't know who it was. Afterwards, she approached me from a distance. You know, she had this really beautiful, exquisite face. She came closer. I saw that the face was, I guess, so I say, it was reworked, lack of a better way of putting it. She came over and she told me I was sitting at the Cafe Rimon, and not far away there was a suitcase, that briefcase where the terrorists left and it exploded. I don't know, 13, 14, I don't remember how many it was tracked. Many, many casualties. She said, I didn't die, but I died. I was waiting for a friend. I mean, put it exactly the way she said it, my face was blown off. I lost my hearing, I lost some of my sight, I lost my smell. My parents didn't know I was in Israel because they never would let me go. I was a secular girl. I wanted to go study. So I told them I'm going to the Middle East. Middle East, that's all right, you know. And then they saw her on CNN covered in blood. And they, of course, came flying. She said, why would God do this to me? I came here to study His Torah in His promised land. And of all people, I'm there on that Friday. And I used to say to God every morning, take my life. Why are you leaving me here like a ragged doll? My dignity, my everything, my spirit. She actually said I was praying every day to die. And then one morning I woke up, the sun was shining in my face, and I don't know what it was, but some type of rush, some type of energy flowed through my veins. And I said to myself, I'm going to survive, I'll get through this, and I'll become stronger than ever. And I'll never forget the word she used. She said, Amuna, the Tachah, the words for faith and trust. She said, you don't know how strong they are until you have nothing but that. And that's what saved my life. Is this scientific? Can you quantify this in a laboratory? How are you going to analyze this? Thank God our enemies, beginning with Pharaoh, never understood the power of faith. Because how do you fight faith? With what weapon exactly? Are you going to subdue it? So, my friends, we're all in this together. One loss is all our losses. We don't need to have answers to be able to forge ahead. And acknowledgement that there's a mystery to life and death, and a mystery to existence. Why are we all here right now in 2024? Why weren't you born 80 years ago in Europe? Can you answer that question? We have no idea. Why were you born into your family, into this place in the world? Why are we all here tonight? Most of the biggest questions are part of the mystery. And embracing the mystery is not trying to figure it out, not trying to philosophize it or quantify it. It's figuring out, as I said, not why, But what are we going to do about it? And yes, the Jewish people say to God the following: we have suffered greatly in your name. We have suffered greatly because you chose us. And we have tremendous anger, and we even have complaints. But we are not going to give up on the goodness that we believe in, no matter what happens. And even when you, God, sometimes are concealed and your face is concealed, we will continue to fight the good cause. Now, what God is thinking when he sees that, I don't envy him, actually, you know. That is the Jewish people in a nutshell. So we don't have the answer to the why, but we become better people and greater people, and that's the ultimate answer. Like every Holocaust survivor will tell you, our revenge, they pull out a photo album. Here's my revenge. My children, my grandchildren, my great-grandchildren, the communities we built, the families we built, the country we built, and everything that comes with that.
Thank you. That's a celebration.
So it's very interesting. As Terry kindly mentioned, I write columns for various publications. I write a monthly Jewish commentary column for Commentary Magazine. And many times you publish something and you don't really hear a very strong response from what you wrote. Even when you publish in the Wall Street Journal about a Jewish subject, usually the letters you get letters from Christians that say, Rabbi, thank you for that inspiring article. God bless you, God bless Israel, God bless the Jewish people. Then you usually get one or two letters from Jews which says, you made one mistake in this, and I think I want to just correct it. But column I wrote recently in Commentary got an overwhelming response, which really I didn't expect it. And the story that I told in this article centered around two Israelis that were taking part in the post-October 7th war. The first one is an amazing man by the name of Golan Vach. Golan Vach is the head of Israel's National Rescue Unit, which means that he descends in cases of disaster. All he sees is death. That's his job. He's a very devout person. And all he sees is death. He came to Florida here after the Surfside collapse. He was here. And he was one of those sent in immediately after October 7th. And all he dealt with was corpses. And in an interview, he said, just to give you a picture of who he is, he said that after he had handled 250 bodies, he said a small prayer to God that something should change. And he said, suddenly out of nowhere, two terrorists opened fire from the right side of the road. We charged at them. One member of our group was wounded, but we killed both Hamas gunmen. And then he said, I thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, I thank God, that I was granted the opportunity to revert back to being a soldier, not a body carrier, for a few minutes. So that's the type of person Golan Vach is, just to give you a sense of it. So Golan Vach told the story that he was serving in Gaza, middle of the night, with another religious Zionist Israeli by the name of Yossi Hershkovitz, who was the principal of a religious school in Israel, a Pallet school. And Hershkovitz was from a musical family, as is the Vachs. And he heard Hershkovitz singing something, humming in the dark while they're surfing in Gaza. And so he said, what are you singing? He said, oh, it's a song I composed. She said, when did you compose it? He said, now. In other words, in Gaza, obviously. What else are you going to do? And he composes the song. So Vach says, teach it to me. And so there in the dark, Hershkovitz sings to Vach the song that he composed. The tune was new, but the words were very old. It was Gam Kelesh, the gates on Lamed, Lo Yirah Ki Atayim Adi. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. So here you have two people who are in the valley of the shadow of death. And one of them spends his entire life serving in the valley of the shadow of death. And he is singing the song together with the composer of this song, Yossi Hershkovitz. Several days later, Yossi Hershkovitz was killed, fell, serving in Gaza. And then, Vach, as he describes, experienced another loss after he lost Hershkovitz physically, which is that he said, I couldn't remember the tune that he had taught me. And then he said, at the funeral, it came back to me. And so he goes to Hershowitz's family and teaches them that song. And they sing it. They sang it at the funeral, and they sang it at the shiva. And then afterwards, Yossi Hershowitz's family recorded the song. It says it were the last gift from their father. That's the story I told. And letters poured into commentary. I heard from all commentators, editors at Greenwald who said, we've got all these letters. Everybody wants to hear the song. Can you send us a link to the song? So I found the links to all these different recordings, and they posted on the commentary website. But for me, it was unexpected. The question is why? And I think first and foremost, because the story is a metaphor for faith itself. The rabbis compare the Torah to a song. In fact, the source for the obligation to write a sacred Torah, according to the rabbis, is from the verse, "Write for yourselves this song." It's understood to be the last commandment in the Torah. And in this rabbinic metaphor, the Torah, Judaism, faith is not turgid text, it's sheet music. So the question is, what does this actually mean? And the point seems to be that in a musical composition, no single note makes a song. It's the different notes together that create meaning. And so to speak of Judaism as a song is to emphasize that we feel somehow that despite everything, our lives are part of something larger and covenantally linked to others. So my late friend, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, reflecting on this metaphor, put it this way. He wrote, "Faith is more like music than science. Science analyzes, music integrates. And as music connects note to note, so faith connects episode to episode, life to life, age to age, in a timeless melody that breaks into time." And then he added, "Faith is the ability to hear the music beneath the noise." Faith is the ability to hear the music beneath the noise. And so somehow this captured, for so many, unexpectedly for me, what it means to have faith in the face of horror. And especially when what is being sung, what is being preserved, is a new composition from ancient words, which remind us that thousands of years ago, King David faced the very same questions. And rather than give a full answer, instead chose to sing, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me." The son, one of the videos we went to, was the son of Yossi Hershowitz who came to America, spoke in Riverdale. And he said, "Now I feel," as he's lost his father, he said, "Now I feel as if I am in the valley of the shadow of death. But I have this song." And then he sang, and of course the words take on, when he's singing his father's composition, it takes on a whole different meaning. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Highlighting how he was connected across worlds in a spiritual connection that defined the horror. And that, I think, is what faith means in the face of this. Faith is the ability to hear the music beneath the noise. Not to answer all questions, but to feel the covenantal connection within our own time and throughout the generations. That, I think, is the Jewish response.
Thank you, Rabbi. In a
Add something? Briefly? No, I just reminded me of a very beautiful episode. My father was a publisher and a journalist, a good friend with Elie Wiesel. And after my father passed away, I continued the tradition. And I was once sitting with Mr. Wiesel, and I asked him this question. I said, "Is it true that when the Jews were marched to the gas chambers, that they often would sing the song, 'Ani Mami,' I believe with complete faith. Even though you may tarry, I believe with complete faith, Mashiach will come." And he said, "Well, we were in the barracks. They kept us from a distance from the chambers, even though we knew what was happening, but they tried to create as much confusion as possible. But in the barracks, all the time, that song, prayers, Kaddish, Shema, you name it. All throughout the day you would hear humming tunes." So I said, with all respect, I want to ask you a question. I'm just an American spoiled kid. I didn't endure or go through anything like this. But doesn't it seem somewhat absurd or even insane? I mean, the Jews are being marched to their deaths. The worst, darkest moment in Jewish history. God is completely concealed. They have all the reason to be angry at God, and instead they're singing His praises. It seems like some deep dissonance and detachment here. Escapism, what was going on? I say it with respect, I'm just trying to understand. And I remember his response, and I heard similar echoed by others, which I just thought would be good to add to this discussion. He said, no, exact opposite was true. The Jews were declaring for them and forever, you may take our bodies, but you can't take our souls. You may take our lives, but you can't take our faith. And if it won't be us, it will be our children. And if it won't be our children, it will be our grandchildren. We will prevail. We will not go down silently as most people thought. And indeed, a few years after I heard that story, I was in Berlin on Hanukkah. And I asked the rabbi to take me to the Brandenburg Gate, where we know who stood there 80 years ago? The Machshemai Hitler, with his hundreds of thousands of Jugendat, spewing his venom. We have videos, pictures. He stood right there by the Brandenburg Gate. You know what's there, Hanukkah now? Hanukkah menorah. And to the right and to the left are the Christmas trees. And I asked the rabbi, how'd you pull that off? He said, I know the curator, and I convinced him for the choreography would really look nice to have a menorah in the center and two pine trees on the right and the left. And you see little Jewish children running around in these yeshivas in Berlin. And the Nazis and their children and grandchildren have changed their names and they're hiding their identities. No one's taking away from the tremendous wound and the tremendous loss. But the song of Ein Mamen, coming from those mouths, continue to sing and sing right now in Berlin. And I think every Jewish soldier and every one of us feels this in our gut and our heart, through and through. Whether we can articulate it or not is another question. But it's there. Why do we need tragedy to bring out these type of things? Maybe that's the next question that I was going to ask, but I don't know. But the point is that Am Yisrael Chai, the thousands of years in an unbroken chain, defying all odds and all statisticians who've written us off in every obituary. Well, here we are. Look at yourself. Living witnesses, every one of us is a miracle, and the Jewish people will continue to be that miracle. Maybe only celebrate it in good times and not necessarily need the darkness to remind us.
One more question of the rabbis, and then we'll open it up for questions from the audience. I've heard many people say since October 7th that October 7th happened, searching for a reason, for some understanding, why did this tragedy befall us? And many have said, well, Israel was on the verge of a civil war, unprecedented division and rift and hatred of Jew against Jew. And some have suggested that this tragedy befell us to bring us back together again. Now, we are not able to speak for God, obviously, and know God's intentions. I'm wondering how that sentiment resonates with you. Do you subscribe to that? Is it something that you ascribe meaning to the tragedy of why it may have occurred?
So I have not attempted, nor will I plan to attempt to explain why it happened. What I do think about is about the date on which it occurred and what we can do to find meaning in that. So just as, for example, my great uncle, Rav Soloveitchik, used to emphasize the fact of the date of the Yom Kippur War, and how the very theme of Yom Kippur is the vulnerability of human beings, and how that attack came to a country 6 years after the Six-Day War that felt strong and confident and almost invulnerable, and how Yom Kippur and its theme was made manifest on that day. For me personally, I've tried to find meaning in and deep consolation and inspiration on the date on which it occurred. So this is, as I wrote in the journal really right after October 7th, that these many decades after the Yom Kippur War, we now have the Simchat Torah War. People haven't been calling it that, but that is what it is. Not the October 7th War, it's the Simchat Torah War. That's when it broke out. And for us, Simchat Torah is a joyous day, not merely because we are finishing the Torah, but because we finished and we started again, which embodies, of course, we believe the eternity of the Jewish people, that the Torah continues to be studied and there will always be Jews to study it, but it also embodies new beginnings in general, and the ability of the Jewish people to overcome shattering events that happened. And I was reminded, as I was thinking about this some weeks later I was reminded of this, but maybe the best Simchat Torah story involves Elie Wiesel, actually and the Lubavitch Rebbe. Am I allowed to go to Lubavitch Rebbe too, Rabbi? So we don't want to ruin my Litvak bona fide, so don't tell anybody.
Your great uncle is already broken through.
Okay, well, we'll try not to spread that around, Rabbi, but yeah. But Elie Wiesel, in his memoir, has a story that when he came to America, he met with the Lubavitch Rebbe. This is when he was young. And he says that, first of all, he wanted to tell the Rebbe that he was affiliated with a different Hasidic court, not Lubavitch, but Vizhnitz. And he told the Rebbe, I have no intention of switching allegiance. And that the Rebbe told him, he said, the important thing is just to be a Chassid. It doesn't matter which one. Which I felt was a little hurtful personally, but okay. And then he says to the Rebbe, he said, the Rebbe, he writes, had read some of my works in French and asked me to explain why I was angry at God. So they spoke for a bit, and Wiesel asked the Rebbe how he could believe in God after Auschwitz. And the Rebbe responded, who else can one believe in after Auschwitz? And then this conversation goes on. Wiesel says, I'll accept your answer, I will take your answer, but I will not accept it. Then he says, on Simchas Torah, he comes back to 770, to the Rebbe's courts. And he stands in the back. And this is what he writes. He says, suddenly the Rebbe saw me and beckoned me to approach. I pretended not to notice. The Rebbe motioned to me again. I didn't budge. Then he called me by name. When I still didn't move, powerful arms grabbed me and carried me over the heads of the crowd to the central table, depositing me like a package in front of the Rebbe. He writes, the Rebbe was smiling. Welcome, he said. It's nice of a chassid of Vizhnitz to come and greet us in Lubavitch. But is this how they celebrate Simchas Torah in Vizhnitz? So he says, Rebbe, we are not in Vizhnitz, we are in Lubavitch. So the Rebbe says, then do as we do in Lubavitch. In Lubavitch we drink and we say l'chaim, to life. So he says, in Vizhnitz too. So the Rebbe says, okay. So he hands me a glass filled to the brim with vodka. So Wiesel says, Rebbe, in Vizhnitz the chassid does not drink alone. So the Rebbe says, nor in Lubavitch. And then he writes, he emptied his glass in one gulp. I followed suit. And then the Rebbe says, is one enough in Vizhnitz? So he responds, in Vizhnitz, I said bravely, one is but a drop in the sea. He says, in Lubavitch as well. He handed me a second glass and refilled his own. He said l'chaim, I said l'chaim. We emptied our glasses. After all, he writes, I had to uphold the honor of Vizhnitz. But as I was unaccustomed to drink, I felt my head begin to spin. My brain was on fire. And then the Rebbe says to Wiesel, in Lubavitch, we do not stop midway. We continue. And in Vizhnitz, he says, in Vizhnitz too, we go all the way. And this is the critical point. He writes, the Rebbe handed me a third glass and refilled his own. My hand trembled. His did not. You deserve a blessing, he said, his face beaming with happiness. Name it. I wasn't sure what to say. I was in a stupor. And then the Rebbe asked, would you like me to bless you so that you could begin again? So Wiesel writes, drunk as I was, I appreciated his wisdom. To begin again could mean many things. Begin again to drink, to pray, to believe, to live. And then he writes, it was Simchas Torah, which is also my birthday. Yes, Rebbe, I said, give me your blessing. And then he writes, he blessed me and downed his vodka. I swallowed mine and passed out. I woke outside, stretched out on the grass, where I had been carried again by the same arms above the heads of the crowd. Several paces away, a young chassid was offering a dozen or so men an eloquent explanation of the profound aspect and mystical significance of my exchange with the Rebbe. So what are we to make of this story? I am neither a chassid of Vision or Lubavitch, but I think you do not need to be a mystical master to understand this. Does one stop midway in L'chaim? Can one, after experiencing destruction, begin again, embrace the world anew, embrace life anew, embrace faith anew? That has always been the Jewish response. And that, of course, is what Simchas Torah is all about. Simchas Torah is about new beginnings and the capacity of the Jewish people to begin again. For me, it will always be the Simchas Torah war. And for me, of course, I will never forget the horror of what we knew was transpiring on that day. But for me, the very name of the war will itself prove the source of inspiration as well.
I concur with Rabbi Soloveitchik that we're not here to try to explain the events of October 7th, Simchas Torah, Shmini Atzeres, Simchas Torah. What did come to mind, we all remember, we'll always remember exactly where we were that morning. I happened to be in California when my daughter came to shul, and the news started trickling in, from bad to worse to worse. You don't know where we were. And, but we forced ourselves to dance. And the rabbi asked me to say a few words. So I said a few words as well. But the thing that struck me, I'd like to share, I'll share it through an anecdote. The Knesset gets together and they're trying to solve the problem with their neighbors, the Arab Muslim world. And one Jew gets up and says, I have a new idea. This is all peace. This anecdote comes to me, but it still fits. He says, instead of fighting with the Arabs, why don't we attack the United States of America? All-out war. And of course they'll beat us. And then, out of their guilt, instead of getting $20 billion a year, we'll get $100 billion a year, like Japan and Germany, and they'll help rebuild. Great idea. Only the truth can come up with something. Anyway, an old Jew sitting in the back of the Knesset, in a thick accent, gets up and says, yeah, very nice idea. But what happens if we win? In other words, we have mastered the art of defense. Nobody can play defense like we do. We've defended ourselves and protected ourselves and survived everything and everyone and ever. But offense is a very different story. I think this is one of the both tragic but also tremendous opportunities we have now. And that's what came to mind that morning. And that is, I hear this all the time from especially young people. I'm sick and tired. We had persecuted, and everyone was united. I think most people were united. We need a homeland for them. But that's when you're fighting enemies. Once you have a home, what is the vision for the future? What is the Jewish vision? I challenge myself, and I challenge all of us here. What is our vision? Just to eliminate Hamas and all our enemies? No more attacks? And then we'll feel that's the truth. We all understand the necessity for that. I'm not minimizing that. You can't be attacked like this, God forbid, and so on. But what do we stand for? Are we able to declare what's the vision for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? If you're asked the question, what does it mean to be Jewish? Why is it important that the Jewish people be on this earth? I think viscerally we all understand question. And not skeptical, just an honest question. Why is Israel that important? Why do we need to have, they say, the land of Israel? Why is it so central? Why do we pray toward the east? Wherever we are in the world, we're praying toward the east. Yerushalayim is in our lips. I forget Jerusalem under a chuppah and tragically during Shir. And we're always mentioning Yerushalayim, Israel. Why is it so central? If we can't answer that question by omission, what is that saying? So I think, again, in our guts, we all feel the importance of it. To me, this is what I was thinking about when that was happening. And not, God forbid, justifying why it happened. No, we don't justify tragedy. God could always find some other way. Doesn't have to use this type of method. But after the fact, Maimonides writes that tremendous line at the beginning of the laws of fasting. Why we fast on a fast day? He says, because when catastrophe strikes a people or an individual, it would be cruel and insensitive to say it was random, mikra mikras, it just happened. It means it's a wake-up call, time for introspection and soul-searching. Not only pointing fingers, pointing out at others, but just not to just take it for granted. Tremendous, unprecedented wake-up call of the soul of the Jewish people, the soul of Israel, the soul of Torah. Why it has to come in this way, I'm not going to explain that. But after the fact, I don't know if there'll be a more definitive event in our lives, to be honest. I'm convinced there won't be. We sure hope there won't be. But as time passes, and generations will look back at 2023, 2024, since Torah war, what will they see? Yeah, we fought valiantly and destroyed our enemy. But we want to leave something stronger. We want to say, we took this situation and we transformed it into the unprecedented wake-up call to show the world once and for all, you know why we're here, the Jewish people? Because we have a grandfather, a great-grandfather called Abraham, and he single-handedly with his wife Sarah, just one individual, pioneered everything we cherish today, all the freedoms. We think people talk about the civil rights, human rights, virtue, charity. I mean, people are not even aware. You know, the United States is only 250 years old. That's like, we're here almost 4,000 years championing these ideas and values. It's only recently become institutionalized that the secular world and the non-Jewish world is starting to embrace Abrahamic principles. We've been doing this for thousands of years and hated for it and persecuted for it. I've never been more proud to be Jewish than I am today. Because one know what we're Jewish, that's what we're Jews. We represent the ultimate of morality. Everything that every human being on earth cherishes, not just Jews. There's a powerful message that says that if the non-Jewish world knew the blessings they receive from Israel, from the Holy Temple, from the Jewish people, those blessed shall be blessed. If they knew what blessings they receive from us, instead of attacking Israel, they surrounded with legions, protecting Israel against its enemies. So this is our opportunity now to shine and rise. And that what's happened at Sinai over 3,300 years ago, and what happened in the times of Abraham and then Isaac and Jacob and Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah, in an unbroken chain, that we can say, yes, we are their grandchildren, and we're living up to their legacy. We have a responsibility today to become proactive Jews, not reactive, not defense, offense, proactive. Every one of us here, our sphere of influence starts with our own children, starts at home. All politics is local. Everything begins right here at your threshold, your doorstep. I see this evening we're here together. To me, this is like the celebration, and Jews everywhere. There is no one is complacent today. You know, apathy is, the guy that asked his friend, what's worse, apathy or ignorance? He said, I don't know and I don't care. That is now not our problem. But now we will have to harness and teach ourselves and our children what it means to be Jew, what is Israel, why why is it central and important, not just to the Jewish people, to the entire world. So that's how I see the events of October 7th, Simchas Torah, waking us up to that conscience, to that higher consciousness.